She did not oversleep. She woke exactly when the village woke, and that was the problem. Every morning before her feet touched the floor, her mind was already running, already replaying what went wrong, already bracing for what would go wrong again. She arrived at each day already spent, already defeated, already carrying yesterday like a stone around her neck. Most people live this way and never notice. They think the day shapes them. They do not realize the morning, the very first hour, is the only moment when they could choose to shape the day instead. Her name was Lena. She was 24 years old, and she was the worst apprentice the old baker had ever taken on, or so the village had decided after the Kessler wedding. It had been a simple commission, a braided ceremonial loaf, glazed with honey, delivered by mid-morning. But that morning, Lena had arrived already knotted with worry. Had she mixed the dough too wet? Would the glaze hold? She moved fast, her hands working while her mind ran ahead to every way it could fail. The oven was too hot. She did not notice in time. When she pulled the loaf out, the crust was black. The smell reached the street. Half the village saw the smoke. The baker said nothing. His silence was worse than any words. That night, Lena lay in bed and replayed it. Not once, many times. She heard the laughter. She felt the heat of the oven on her cheeks, and then the cold shame that followed. When she finally slept, she slept badly. When she woke, before the room was light, she was already replaying it again. Already braced. Already spent. She ate nothing. Her stomach was a fist. She arrived at the bakery with her shoulders tight and her jaw set, moving quickly to look as though nothing had happened. He gave her the simplest work possible. Plain morning rolls. Nothing that could shame anyone. Lena made them perfectly. Nobody said so. That evening, a merchant passed her in the street and looked through her as though she were a fence post. She went home and sat in the dark and made a decision. She would leave. First thing in the morning, she would tell the baker and go. But the morning did not go the way she planned. She woke before the village, before the baker, before the roosters had finished deciding whether it was day. She rose to pack her things. Instead, she found herself outside, on the cold stone step, wrapped in her coat, not moving. She did not know why she sat down. She simply did. The village was completely still. She could hear the river past the mill. The sky was the color of ash, and then slowly the color of pale water, and then the palest kind of blue. Nothing had gone wrong yet. The day was still clean. She did not leave. The next morning, she woke earlier still. Her eyes simply opened, and she lay listening to the silence before rising and going to the step again. This time, she picked up a small stone from the path and turned it in her hands. Cold, smooth, simple. Her mind, which had been running, went quiet. For a few minutes, there was only the stone and the dark and the distant sound of the river. She began to notice 3 things that happened when she gave herself that early hour. The first, her hands stopped shaking. The trembling that had lived in her fingers since the wedding slowly eased, as though her body had been waiting for permission to let go. The second, she grew genuinely hungry, which meant her stomach had unclenched enough to ask for something. She began eating a small piece of bread on the step before going inside, the first real appetite she had felt in weeks. The third, she arrived at the oven without her jaw set. She did not plan what to make. She let the first task come to her naturally, instead of bracing for everything at once. The baker noticed. He stopped watching her with that careful, measuring look. One morning, he left a more difficult commission on the workbench without assigning it to anyone. Lena looked at it. She did not reach for it that day, but she did not look away either. Weeks passed. Then came the announcement. The miller's daughter was to be married. A ceremonial loaf was needed. The baker mentioned it aloud and looked at no one in particular. The silence was Lena's to fill, or leave empty. That night, she did not sleep well, but the feeling was different. Not shame spinning in circles. Something tighter, something that wanted to move. She rose in deepest dark. She sat on the step in cold so sharp it made her eyes water. She held her cup of warm water in both hands and stayed there until the wanting was stronger than the fear. Then she went inside. She tended the fire first, slowly, building the heat without rushing it. She touched the flour with the back of her hand, feeling its temperature. She pressed her thumb into the salt and tasted it. Small acts, but they returned her to the present, to this dough, this morning, this loaf, instead of the 1,000 ways it might fail. When she pulled the loaf from the oven, the bottom crust was dark. Not ruined, but darker than it should be. She felt the old weight rise in her chest, the shame assembling itself. She let it rise. Then she set the loaf on the table, picked up a knife, and trimmed the base clean and even. She cut a small piece from the end and tasted it. The crumb was open and soft and faintly sweet. It was the best thing she had ever made. She carried it to the baker. He turned it over. He saw the trimmed base. He looked at her, and she met his eyes without looking away. He said, "The inside is what feeds people." He wrapped it in cloth and sent it to the wedding. Lena never became someone who did not make mistakes. She became someone who knew what to do with the hour before the mistakes arrived. The Stoics called this the discipline of the morning. Not a ritual of affirmation, not the performance of confidence, but the quiet act of arriving at your own mind before the world could arrive there first. Marcus Aurelius wrote each dawn as though the day were a choice, not a sentence. That is what Lena learned on the cold stone step. The morning does not promise you a perfect loaf. It gives you something rarer, yourself, unclaimed for 1 hour. Before dawn, the steppe is cold. The village is still. A young woman sits with both hands around a cup of warm water, watching the sky move from ash to pale blue. She's not running from anything now. She simply arrived here first, before the day could arrive and claim her. Most of us hand the first hour of the morning to worry, to a screen, to the residue of yesterday. We begin the day already reactive, already behind. What if you claimed that hour? Not to plan, not to perform, but simply to be the first one there. Keep seeking, keep growing, and keep shining. Subscribe to join us for the next one.